I want to thank CDPHP for joining us and collaborating on this project and giving us the full support of Dr. Bennett and his staff. And I will tell you that it's been very pleasant through the first two talks for our staff to work with their staff and to have his financial support to bring in the speakers for this series. Again, tonight, Dr. Reinhardt will talk about U.S. healthcare under siege, challenges and opportunities. And so I'd like to invite to the stage Dr. John Bennett, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Bennett.
So good evening. I'm John Bennett, and I want to welcome you to tonight's event and thank Dr. Reinhardt for coming. As you know, this is the second event in our series, and it's sponsored, as you know, by CDPHP and the University at Albany School of Public Health. I want to just take a brief moment to thank both the staffs at both institutions and organizations for doing just a tremendous job in organizing this. So let me give them a round of applause. And I want to thank my board for helping me on this quest. Many of them are here today in the audience for letting us partner with the School of Public Health in this endeavor, because this is important work, and we know how important this work is, and we know that the light is being focused on our state and our region. And I want to take a minute to recognize Dr. Shah. Dr. Shah, thank you for coming. Our Commissioner of Health, who really is leading us towards making New York State really a beacon in the nation. We see that on many levels, not only the relative success of the New York State Health Exchange compared to what's going on in the rest of the nation, but really some great plans that Dr. Shah has for this state. And I think in light of that, I think the capital area has a particular opportunity and responsibility to lead in that. And I'm very proud that as the major health insurer of this region, that CDPHP can play a part in that. As I mentioned, we had our first event with Dr. Gawande, and tonight we're going to talk about a little more controversial topic, healthcare costs. We've had the recent launch of the Federal Health Exchange. We've had an explosion in hospital and provider consolidations, and I couldn't imagine a better or more opportune time for this talk. You could say, did we plan it this way? And the answer is we did. I wanted to do this right after the opening of the exchange. There are a lot of challenges, but as I said, I think we have a huge opportunity to do the right thing for our community right now. I'm thrilled to, again, be in partnership with the School of Public Health, and I'm really thrilled to introduce tonight's distinguished guest speaker. Dr. Uwe Reinhardt is a professor of economics at Princeton University, where he teaches health economics, comparative health systems, general microeconomics, and financial management. Dr. Reinhardt is also the co-director of the Griswold Center for Economic Policy Studies at Princeton University. The bulk of his research has been focused on health economics and policy, both in the U.S. and abroad. Recognized as one of the nation's leading authorities on healthcare economics, Dr. Reinhardt has been a member of the Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences since 1978. He's a past president of the Association of Health Services Research, and from 1986 to 1995, he served as a commissioner on the Physician Payment Review Committee, established in 1986 by Congress to advise on issues related to the payment of physicians. He's a senior associate of the Judge Institute for Management of Cambridge University in the United Kingdom, and a trustee of Duke University and the Duke University Health System. Dr. Reinhardt has served on numerous editorial boards, among them the Journal of Health Economics, the Milbank Memorial Quarterly, Health Affairs, the New England Journal of Medicine, and the Journal of the American Medical Association. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Uwe Reinhardt to New York's Capital Region. There you are.
Well, thank you very, very much for this kind introduction and for inviting me here, and thank you for coming. on this cold day. It reminds me of Saskatchewan, where I studied. I come, of course, from warmer climes, New Jersey, and I didn't even bring a coat here. I see Commissioner Shaw. We met last time at an international meeting where ministers of health from many different countries were, and one of the countries was New York. To us New Jerseyites, we have, as you know, a great inferiority complex. Our radio, TV station says not New York, not Philadelphia. That's how we define ourselves. Although I prefer to say, for New Yorkers, we're the light at the end of the tunnel. So I'll be talking about U.S. healthcare under siege, which, of course, it is. And there are challenges, but I think there are also great opportunities. I recently sat next to the Minister of Health of Greece. I was in a meeting in Austria. And the first thing I told him, hey, I'm not German, I'm an American, so don't hit me. Because, as you know, the Greeks don't, at the moment, very much like the Germans. But he said, actually, this crisis is very good for him, because he can get things done that before there was resistance. You know, there was everything always just went on as before, and he could never get anything done. And he said, now that we're in the soup, I can actually really reform the health system and make it better. So therein lies some opportunities whenever you are under siege. Although the U.S. health system isn't under terrible siege, even Obamacare actually doesn't affect most Americans very much at all. If you simply tuned out and never listened to anything said on the talk show, you'd be fine, because it literally most people here are not affected very much by it. Overall, Obamacare, if it worked, would add 5% to national health spending, so it's not that much in that regard either. So it's really not that big a deal. It's a patch on a big system, and that's what it is. Now that somehow they have such trouble getting the patch on, there's another issue. I just literally, in the afternoon Washington Post, it said that 40% of the back office stuff on the healthcare.gov has yet to be written. And they got 10 days, so I don't know how that will work. But anyhow, any talk on healthcare in America has to begin with a map of Iraq. And you may wonder why that is so. And the reason it is so, because for millennia, we believed that Paradise, this big nudist camp in Genesis, was located somewhere in the Sunni Triangle between the Euphrates and the Tigris, somewhere here, somewhere between al-Ramadi and Baghdad and Fallujah. Somewhere, believe it or not, was Paradise. That's what people say. But more recent research, and you know, you go to Brooklyn, some rabbis will still tell you that. But if recent research has shown it was actually located in the vast stretch of land between Mexico and Canada, here. But only a few people were actually, like in the old one, only Adam and Eve, I don't know where all the other people lived, were allowed to live there, and those people were working in U.S. healthcare. So that's Paradise. That's really what it was. This one here, of course, is hell on earth, healthcare hell on earth. That's Canada, and Mexico as well. That's sort of what we generally think. And here's what that looked like. And I remember it. If you have gray hair, you will remember. That's how healthcare looked like. Here, you have a hospital, a health system CEO. Here's a physician. And here's some really clueless, docile, dumb payers, employers in the lead, government people, and so on. And that's how healthcare was. And, you know, they spoke a very funny dialect in Paradise. For example, they never said they got paid. They said they got reimbursed. which is a quite different thing. Have you ever gone to a hotel and say, may I reimburse you? You don't do that, right? But at a hospital, when you get discharged, you get reimbursed them. And they thought that way too. The word reimbursement affected how they thought about management, which is we put anything in place we want and someone owes us reimbursement. And that was hospital management 101, easy to teach. Do what you like, send someone the bill. If it's employers, they'll pay it. And they did. And I hate to say this, probably some employers here, but in the heyday of that, you know, any bill they paid, and sometimes accidentally they paid the invoice number. They didn't even wait for the amount billed. And people who know me knows that I've been a critic of the role of employers who until recently slept through it all, but now I think wide awake. The footprints left behind by this area, by this era, are these. So at the bottom, you have, scaled it to 100 in 1965. The bottom line is inflation-adjusted GDP per capita, $2,009. And you see that basically increased 2.1-fold in real dollars over this period. And if you look at healthcare, that grew over fivefold, about fivefold in that period. Those are the footprints that were left behind by Paradise, by the healthcare Paradise. Now, the actuaries in those days, and it's only changed in the year 2000, the actuaries used this equation. And I always told my students, you can go work being a government actuary if you know this expression. Healthcare spending growth will be whatever the GDP growth is, plus D, and D was somewhere between 2 and 2.5%. And that's what it was. And it always turned out to be the case. There's a little equation. This is actually a compound interest equation, actually from an exam question on my corporate finance class. You had to figure this out. This is the fraction of GDP projected to be absorbed by healthcare in the future year T, 2050, say. The XO down, 1 over XO, is the fraction of GDP absorbed by healthcare now. At the moment, it's close to 18%. And then the little d, which is the only other variable in the equation, is t, of course, that's time. D, that little d is that growth differential, 2.5%, 2 to 2.5%. And if you use that, my wife and I made a funny Christmas card. We always did in the 90s. And we started in 1990 to 2100. And using that equation, that's the prediction. Then it was half of GDP would be absorbed by healthcare in 2050 and 81% by 2100. Now, the cheerful message of this Christmas card was, it'll never go to 100%. Some people had said it'll go to 100%, but asymptotically, it could only asymptotically reach, because nothing can grow faster than itself, and healthcare is part of GDP, of course. Students asked, how could this actually work? I said it could have. There would have been king-size beds from coast to coast, made by Mitsubishi and Mercedes-Benz. 2 Americans with MD degrees in each bed, giving each other checkups around the clock. Somebody in India would be receiving the bills these MDs sent each other and added up and tell us what our GDP was. So I said this could be quite pleasant if you did this correctly. Anyway, that was it was. Now, this rush of money into U.S. healthcare, it did a lot of great things. We have a very highly educated and trained health workforce. I don't think any other country could claim they train doctors better, and we also educate doctors. There's a difference between training and education, as you know. Our doctors have a bachelor degree, where they learn the kind of stuff I teach them, which is exquisite, and then they become doctors to be trained. then only will they become narrow-minded. In other countries, they go from high school right to medical school. Well, you know, professional training makes you narrow-minded. Economists are even more narrow-minded. As you can see, we didn't even understand why the financial crisis happened, because in theory it shouldn't have. Imagine if sort of physicians in a town specializing in communicable disease diagnosed as a cold when there were a rampant epidemic going around. That's what economists did when Wall Street went berserk. So we are even more tunnel-minded, but at least at some point we had an education. We have highly sophisticated and miraculous medical technology, and more is to come. I mean, there will be neuromodulation. You can implant a little thing in the neck of somebody and control migraine or incontinence. What's on the horizon is utterly stunning. And we invent in the US a lot of it because the money was there. Luxurious healthcare facilities and customer-friendly health service. I mean, maybe I'm spoiled, but by and large, I think American healthcare is very customer-oriented. I mean, when it hurts, they'll tell you ahead of time. In some places, they really don't. No queues into healthcare for most Americans. 85% of the people have reasonably good health insurance. And then et cetera. I always put et cetera because somebody comes up, you forgot this. I say, oh no, it was in the et cetera. So is anyone here like the Zac Brown Band? There's some culture here. I love these guys, you know. They have this thing, you know, what is it? Toe in the water, ass in the sand, world in my, good beer, cool beer in my hand, life is good today. And that's what the sort of theme song of US healthcare was till 2000. But then something happened, something bad. I don't know why, but I don't know why the fall from grace happened either. Does anyone know why? You know, it was there and they ate it. I don't know why that was so bad. Had vitamin C. Anyway, in the new millennium, US healthcare got kicked out of paradise and the inhabitants were completely shell-shocked. And basically what people in healthcare were said, go forth and enter the real economy and behave like everyone else there has behaved for at least 2,000 years, where you have budgets, you get to work back from that, and so on and so forth. And no more reimbursement. It's payment from now on. And that's the fall from grace. And you can see it here. This is real per capita health spending from, it started in 2002. I don't know why it started there, but you could see the annual growth in real per capita health spending, which then was 7%, is down to about 2% now. So it's not shrinking, but it sure isn't growing the way it used to. Now, we had been there before. This was in the 90s. You may remember there was a period where healthcare grew only as fast as GDP. And then, however, came the Medicare, managed care backlash, and you fought this, and they were all chased into the woods. And the reason that happened is it was a period of economic boom, a tight labor market, and business couldn't control what their workers wanted and continue to give them everything they wanted. And so it was impossible to put employees into narrow networks, to have high deductibles. Times are different now. It's a sluggish economy. Labor is in retreat, doesn't have much power, and employers now can shove down the throat of workers things they couldn't shove down in the 90s. And that's why I think it is different now. So managing now actually means you have a budget and your expenses have to be worked off that budget and you have to somehow make it come out at the bottom. No more reimbursement. The clearest example of that is the Massachusetts Blue Cross contract, which is literally a global budget that's capitated per person and given to a big medical group. So, you could have that here, and I would imagine before long you will have that here. So that's the new world, and the GDP growth now is about GDP plus 0.5%. Actually, it's less than 0.5%. And the forecast you see, even the long-run forecast, the government actuaries make, is about GDP, it's X or D, I called it earlier. It's about 0.5% or less. That's what people, actuaries, are now projecting for the future. So this growth of 2.5 percentage points faster than the year before, I think that's a thing of the past. So the question why did this happen? We know the secrets. My wife explained it to me. Adam wanted the forbidden fruit, but he was too lazy to get it, and Eve asked Eve to get it for him. That's my wife's story, which has a certain plausibility with a lazy husband. You know how that is. So she blames it on Adam. But why in healthcare? Why was paradise lost? Well, one was macroeconomic pressure. So the 2%, there is a law. Herb Stein, who was the chief economist for Richard Nixon, he had a famous law, said a trend that cannot possibly persist won't. It's a very profound law. It's the only law in economics all economists agreed to, by the way. And that's him. You remember him? I mean, he really was serious. And this is, of course, you cannot have GDP plus 2.5% forever. And that just wouldn't work. So there were the government budgets. Here is health spending projected to 2019. Medicare, see, people always say the real problem with America is Medicare. Medicare is out of control, and that is why U.S. health spending is out of control. That's complete nonsense. That's just this little sliver down there. And then you have Medicaid, and then you have other public health programs, including the VA and so on, and TRICARE. Then you have private insurance, private out-of-pocket, and other private, whatever that is, private philanthropy or what it might be. But the interesting thing here is it's projected to be close to 20% actually by 2019. Half of spending, health spending, pretty much is already government, and the other half is private. And I don't think that'll change a lot. You can privatize Medicare, but it's still tax money for the most part. So these budgets are under tremendous stress because of the fiscal policy we run. We have a public debt of $17 trillion now. And obviously there's going to be fiscal pressure on all of these public programs. And here you can see state funding. You had between 2011 and 12, state funding, Medicaid funding for all the states went up 16 billion. And you can see spending for K up to K-12 went down 2.5 billion. State universities, 5 billion. Public assistance and transportation, everything is traded down. And you could see the trade-offs the governors are making. So, if this keeps on going, we'll have a highly over-medicalized kids who are dumb. And the real thing is when you travel to Asia and you read about Shanghai education or education in Seoul, and you say we're supposed to compete with them, and most competition now actually requires human capital of a higher order, and we're not training it and leaving many, many American children uneducated. So God gave us these children, but we do not put human capital on them. That's not good for America. So that's a problem that we see. So you really want to think about healthcare as follows. It isn't, we always, particularly health care providers, always say, look at the great valuable things we do. And that is certainly true. Healthcare is one of the most valuable value-added sectors in the economy. However, you also have to look at the opportunity cost. What does it displace when half of it goes through public budgets? And so you really want to focus on the net social value. So these opportunity costs are neglecting the education of the young, neglecting basic science, neglecting public infrastructure. When you drive through New York City, you certainly know what that is. Neglecting national security, that could very well happen. Our son fought in Iraq, no flak jacket, and an unarmored Humvee. There was no money for that. And giving up other enjoyable things that households enjoy. So that is really the value proposition in healthcare. It's not just the gross value. You really have to look at what does it displace. Then you have employer and the employees. And here is a real sort of misconception. A lot of employees think their company gives them health insurance. The company does no such thing. The company can sponsor it, but the employees pay for it. Think of it when you're a business person. The wage that you're thinking of, the cost of labor is total compensation, is your debit to payroll expense account, the total. That's the cost of labor. You take that compensation, some of it you put into little green packages called fringes, the other you put into a gray package called take-home pay. And that's how it is. But we economists are convinced that employees pay for their own health care for the most part, that the employer pays the premium, but then takes it out of take-home pay. I tell my students, think of a garden party and there's a pickpocket. He steals your wallet and then buys you chocolates and roses. You would say thank you, but it's still a pickpocket. And employee benefit managers in corporations are doing their pickpockets too. They take it out of your paycheck and then give you health insurance, but in fact you're paying for it. And giving that, so this is all paid by, quote, paid by the employer, but it really was your wages to begin with. And then, of course, there are withholdings out of your pay stub and then the take-home pay. So if you now look at this number, this is Milliman, a benefit managing firm. They add up they have a database of 10 million families insured, under age 65, insured with a preferred provider, a PPO insurance policy. And so they have the database. They can add up the employer's contribution to insure to the premium, the employee's own contribution to the premium, and the employee's family's out-of-pocket spending. And for the typical family of four, every year they publish an index. And this is the index. In 2001, it was 8,400 total family spending for a family of four. It's now $22,000, 22. And that's a number worth keeping in mind. And that comes effectively out of the paycheck of workers. How it comes out of each worker's paycheck, we don't know, but it gets pushed back into payroll. And so there was this article in Health Affairs not long ago. A decade of healthcare cost growth has wiped out the real income gains for an average U.S. family, meaning the take-home pay. It's basically the take-home pay in real dollars for the average American family didn't increase at all in that decade. It all went to fringes, mainly to health care. And so there is that problem. Then comes yet another problem, the political economy of sharing. The United States distribution of income is as unequal as that of China. We use a coefficient called the Gini coefficient to measure that. You can look it up in the best database. I think it's the CIA fact. They have a fact, CIA facts, I think, if you Google it. And you see our Gini coefficient, the higher it is, the more unequal, is on par with China's. The European is much more equal. Taiwan, Japan, far more equal distributions of income. Here's a paper, Journal of Economic Literature. It's on the web. You can get it, by 3 authors who studied what the top income families in the top income groups got as a fraction of national income from 1900 on, I think they go, for about something like 8 countries. And what they find here for the US, the share of the total national income available that went to the households in the top 10% of the income distribution. This is the sort of Great Gatsby era here. We're now back into that era, and you could see it. You know, these guys who build boats so big they can't turn around in a harbor, you know, people drowning in money and don't know what to do, or people who go to these bars where they have a gin that costs $50 a glass, and it's just really rotten potato squeeze. That's what gin is. But you have these bars where the bankers go and with tabs of 16,000. I mean, this kind of thing. We're back right there. And then you had this period here, 1940 to 1980. And I asked my student, why was the income distribution so less unequal then? Part of it is because we were the manufacturing base for the world, because the rest of the world was destroyed. And the economy existed heavily. There were some services, but the bulk of it was manufacturing, and the bulk of it was unionized. And the union leaders and the employers hashed out a deal where the unions managed to get a much larger share of GDP than labor now gets. It used to be, when I was a graduate student, labor got 75% of GDP. I think we're down to 63 now. And the reason why it was easy to legislate social programs, A, the income distribution was more equal, and B, the soldiers who came back from the trenches, from the ships, from the airplanes, were egalitarians, because they all suffered, they fought together, they died together, they went through the Depression together. I always tell my students, your grandparents were egalitarians. They came back largely egalitarians. And their kids, the baby boom, forgot that message, and they became selfish, which is a natural human tendency. And I don't know what my students, how they will be, whether they will be even more selfish than we were, or whether they will move back a little bit and share more. We don't know, but that's what it was. Here is from that same paper, the fraction of total income growth captured by the top 1%. In the period 2000 to 2072, the top 1% of the income distribution garnered 65% of the income growth. The 99% had to share the other third of that. If you go over the much longer period, 76 to 2007, it was 58%. So that is where the income distribution became so unequal. Now, there's not an issue of fault. It just happened that way. So here's again that graph I showed you earlier. And now juxtapose that graph, what it costs for a family of 4, with the income distribution. It's the Census Bureau, 2010. This is money income after taxes, after cash transfers, but it doesn't include the monetary value of Medicaid or benefits in kind. And so if you were to say families should look after their own health care, it's a consumer good. If you were to say that, I would ask, so you have 50% of American households having an income of less than $50,000. One item, health care, costs $20,000. Is that a feasible calculation? But look how many families have an income of $25,000 or less. And if you took 20 out of that for health care, there'd be 5 left for everything else. So this doesn't work anymore. And that is the devil that the healthcare system faces, and higher education, by the way, faces too. Unless we really have an option, the people in the upper third of the income distribution, they could say, look, we'll tax ourselves and help the people in the bottom third of the income distribution get roughly the same kind of health care we get, egalitarian care. So that's one option. And if they don't do that, I don't even know how it'll go. We basically sort of have a one-tier health system at the delivery side, except, of course, the uninsured don't get access to it as easily, and Medicaid patients don't get access to a lot of physicians. But once you're in a hospital, you get treated the same. Remember when Mount Sinai wanted to build a wing for Medicaid so that they could bring social services in? Jack Rowe wanted to do that, and all hell broke loose in the papers. So it's reasonably egalitarian. But if you want to maintain that, then the upper third of the income distribution has to be willing to pay more taxes to subsidize the health care of the lower third. Otherwise, you will get a three-tier system. And this is what I think might happen. You might see us convert Medicare into a poverty program, and you can do that by converting it into a premium support model, and then keep the premium support smaller and smaller, making the elderly pay more and more of the premium out of their own pocket, unless you're a pauper, and then you're in a pauperized rump of Medicare, probably thrown in with Medicaid. I could see that by the year 2030. I could see us there. And then healthcare delivery wouldn't be from normal delivery channels. There would be public hospitals, budgeted, underfunded, of course, and public clinics, budgeted and underfunded, tightly budgeted, generics, biologicals you could forget. You could run a sort of quasi-third world tier for the poor. You would have reference pricing for the rest, the employment-based system, which is already being converted to a defined contribution plan at the premium level. They call it private exchanges, but it's really the same as the 401k doing the same to healthcare. But they can go further. They can say, if you want to have a baby, the employer or insurer would say, you want to have a baby, there are some cheap hospitals. If you go there, we'll pay it. If you go to a hospital that's more expensive, you pay the whole difference between what we pay you and what they charge you. You pay that out of pocket. That is reference pricing. And then for the upper income groups, boutique medicine, which we already have now. This reference pricing is already happening. This was on the web where I found it. CalPERS reference pricing, California Personnel Retirement System. And here are the prices of California hospitals for hip and knee replacements. And you see there are some hospitals, they're actually high-volume hospitals, who do that very cheaply, and there are other hospitals who charge up to $200,000 for this. That's actually what they traditionally even got paid. At the 95th percentile, $75,000. And what the insurance with employers, WellPoint did this, are saying, the reference price is $30,000. You can go to any hospital that'll take you $30,000 and we'll pay for it. If you go to a hospital that charges you $75,000, you pay the extra $45,000 out of your own pocket. That's reference pricing. And that was done for these two procedures. And what happened is, after it was done, these high prices here all collapsed down to near the reference price. But that is what I believe will be coming. That's, I think, the future of employment-based health insurance. You can't do it for everything, but you can do it for coronary bypasses, normal deliveries, C-sections. You can do this for a lot of things. Now, there was issues with value added, and I don't want to dwell on that because you know to err is human, the Institute of Medicine, and the crossing the quality chasm, and everyone's been working on it. You know, the interesting thing about healthcare, I have to say this. I was just again in Washington at the Commonwealth Fund meeting, and it was this international meeting, and around the world, physicians plead mea culpa. Yes, too much bad quality is delivered. People die that shouldn't. But I say, at least you guys worry about it. You know, the physicians are really worried about quality in healthcare and are working to improve it. But if you go to higher education, I don't see much done there in that regard to make it cheaper, more cost-effective. That's my business. And then when you go to the judicial system, what we call the system of justice, loosely speaking, I don't think, do they ever worry about efficiency, or do they even worry about quality? They sort of do, but I think incredible injustices are committed by the New York Times just had an editorial where people sit in jail for life without parole for very trivial infractions that were victimless crimes even. So our system of justice doesn't do justice. It's something, whatever it is. But I think neither education nor the justice system could tie the shoes of the healthcare system when it comes to worrying about cost effectiveness and quality. So I would salute you in the health system for that. So here come now is the Affordable Care Act, the solution. This is 2009, this was in The Economist. And here's President Obama, who wanted to reach out and do this bipartisan deal. Here are the Republicans, and here are the interest groups. And you all know what happened. This plan, I can get the entire Affordable Care Act onto one slide. It's really not that big a deal. There was to be insurance reform, Title I of the bill, reforming the small and non-group market, the individual market, and giving subsidies to poor people to buy insurance in that market or get into Medicaid. On the delivery side, move to clinically integrated healthcare through affordable care organizations, greater transparency on and accountability for the use of resources, prices, quality, and so on. You know, your Form 990 will be on your website. All of that will be coming. So those are the two big blocks. Then payment reform, moving from fee-for-service to bundled payments, and then finally controlling the future growth of health spending. Those were the four major goals this bill had. Now, it takes a lot of pages to write this down. A, they only use half a page. The margins are huge. Second, the font is 24 or 18. I once took this thing and put it into normal margin with 12 Roman, times Roman, and I think it's only about 600 pages. Yeah. But we were told the other day by the German minister that a major health it was the Canadian. Yesterday in my class I had a Canadian talk about Canadian health system. The entire Medicare Act of Canada of 1966 was 14 pages long. I don't know how they do that in these countries. Anyhow, you have Title I, which is the health insurance piece. Then you have public programs, Title III, improving quality. You have all these titles that are Obamacare. It's not just what you think, the healthcare.gov. That's only a piece of it. This one, long-term care, has already been stricken, and this is the one that's malfunctioning. But everything else is moving forward. There are ACOs. A lot of this stuff, preventive care, the health workforce, people are working on that. So to say all of healthcare was, Obamacare was a failure is not right. A major piece of it was Title I, because you have demonstration projects on payment reform, ACOs, you have a Center for Innovation in Government, transparency, that work is underway, great progress in healthcare IT. We used to lag Europe shamelessly 5 years ago, and we're almost caught up with Europe now on IT. So that's what I said. Obamacare is not overall a failure. What is a failure is the pièce de résistance, which was this medical marketplace that was supposed to be in place. Now, it is a complicated thing. You have this exchange, which is a farmer's market for insurance, and if you, Mr. or Mrs. Jones, go on there, they first of all have to check you give them actually not that much information. Your income and your age and your zip code is pretty much what it needs, right? It doesn't really need, I'll mention in a second, something the Republicans cooked up at the American Enterprise Institute that needs your entire family, your entire medical history inputted into the exchange and your family's history. And your premium will go up even if you eat yogurt and jog and do all these horrible things. If your grandmother and your mother had breast cancer, you will get punished for that in the premium. Watch my blog post Friday where I describe this plan. It's coming out Friday. That's the American Enterprise Institute. So this is actually simple compared to what the alternative would be. But it has to check, are you so poor that you should be in Medicare, Medicaid? To do that, it has to check with the IRS what your income is. It has to check, are you so old you should be in Medicare? It has to link to the Internal Revenue Service, and then it has to link to every insurance company that is offering insurance on the exchange. So writing that software is tough. Now, when you start only in January, you almost guarantee failure, and that is what the president did, or his team, and that's why not the one before in the New York Times, the president had said the product, the exchange is unacceptable and there's no excuse for it. So I'm a simple-minded economist. I said, imagine if a student handed in a paper that's unacceptable and there's absolutely no excuse for that. What grade would I give that student? An F. It's the only honorable grade you could give. And only F, because F minus we don't do. So that's what I gave the president, and I stand by that. I call it a midterm grade. Maybe they can still, you can flunk the midterm and still get a reasonably good grade, a B plus, for the course. Maybe in March, I'll give them a B plus, but that'd be the highest grade I'd ever give that crew. A is out. Now, so they had hoped this would work. In New York State, it actually worked. Usually nothing ever works in New York, but this one, when there's a saying, if it works in Minnesota, it won't in New York. Eli Ginsberg, remember Eli Ginsberg always said that. If it works anywhere else in America, it won't in New York. But in fact, here it was the opposite. It worked in New York reasonably well. There were some glitches, but it worked. The federal exchange, I tried to get on it, and you got this. We have lots of, just stay with us, stay on this page. So I stayed on the page, had a scotch, still on the stage. Oh yeah, you should have a bottle of scotch. And you should have a Korean soap opera running on the other screen so that you don't get impatient. And then the system is down at the moment, but these are long moments, like entire weekends, and so on. This is the launch of this website. So what actually went wrong? It is being ridiculed by every comedian, and I don't know, this I think shouldn't have happened. I have no idea who allowed Secretary Sebelius to go on Jon Stewart. When there's some people, Sean Hannity and Jon Stewart, I wouldn't go because you're not going to come out looking glorious. So, and he had sport with her, which I don't think is good for a highly placed civil servant to be sort of made the laughingstock, but he did, because I think Jon Stewart was pretty angry about the whole thing. But it really is only this piece of Obamacare that has these problems. Now, as I say, Obama knew this, so somehow I have a feeling these people in the White House, they're friends of mine, but they are all like me. They are geeks. I mean, geeks have their virtues. For one, we are brilliant. I think, you try that. Sit there all day being brilliant. It's not easy. But we can't manage a damn thing. That is for sure, right? That's why we have spouses who do that. So I would have said, frankly, Implementing a thing like that takes a CEO, somebody who has spent a life kicking butt. Somebody has put teams together, like Leonard Schaefer, who built WellPoint, or Bill McGuire, who built United Healthcare. After all, you will be dealing with insurers. What better than to have a retired CEO who would find that a nice hobby, and however, who would know how to eat malfunctioning employees for breakfast. They didn't have this, and there was no one in charge. So it's very sad what happened there. I don't think it'll be working in November. It said just now, I looked on the afternoon Washington Post, 40% of the back office work of the exchange is not yet working, and they have only these 10 days. That's what I told you. So in Washington, they doubt that this fragile, that there is a possibility that the Obamacare will not survive the managerial incompetence. And how could that happen? Well, if not enough young people sign up on the exchanges, then the risk pool on the exchange will be mainly sicker people. Therefore, the actuarial cost will be high. Therefore, next year's premiums for the year 2015 will be much higher than this year, where the insurers probably mispriced the risk. They thought more young people were in it, and probably a lot of insurers could lose money on the first year. Then they'll jack up the premiums next year, and then more young people will drop out, and you get the death spiral. Have you ever heard of a death spiral in insurance? If you're in New York, you've lived through it, because you have community rating and no mandate, and only a very few New Yorkers buy insurance on the old individual market. I don't know how much it was, 17,000 was a very low number, and the premiums are just beyond belief, something like $2,000 a month for a single individual. And in New Jersey, just as bad. That could happen to the exchange. Then Obamacare would not make it. But then again, the alternative that's being proposed is to allow insurers to price on the risk of the individual and their family history, and the insurance exchange you would need to operate that makes Obamacare look like child's play. Among others, all this intimate information you would have to enter into an exchange. It would be broadcast to maybe up to 50 different insurance companies, each of whom would have to bid and give you a premium on a basic package. So your most intimate health record would be broadcast to God knows who. And that is the Republican vision. So I don't know how this is. I think in the end, Medicaid is actually the answer, because that's the only piece of it that's working. So what then if it fails? Well, if it fails, it probably cannot be replaced at the federal level. This is something I don't understand. That's why I will speak about it. Oh, yes, that's what professors can do. Give us 45 minutes. Give me any topic, Siberian climate, I will lecture. Once I had too much soju in Taiwan, and the Korean head of the Korean health insurance industry, after I had about 5 soju, it's a pretty strong drink, says, challenged me to get up and give a lecture on Korean soap operas. And undaunted, I did. And if you want it, email me, I'll send it to you. I actually later was so enamored with it, I wrote it up. I say, hey, you know, that's what I mean, being brilliant. This is what we do. But this is my colleagues in political science. Somehow they seem to be able to measure sort of polarization. And this is 1967, 68, and there was a lot of overlap in people like Lowell Weicker, you know, who he really was just like a Democrat, and then you had Democrats who were really like Dave Durnberger, and they passed legislation together. And then that moved apart in 87, 88, and 2007, 08. There's almost no overlap. Peter Orszag actually uses that. It's actually a Rand Corporation paper, but he was the first to use it, so I'll give him a little footnote here. So that's that. But then I saw Bill McInturff, who is a Republican pollster, a really great guy, and he had a similar graph. This shows, I guess he measured how often Republicans and Democrats voted for the same bill in the affirmative. And in the 82, there was a lot of overlap, a lot of bipartisan. Remember Reagan came into office then, and the Republicans and Democrats voted very much on the same bills together, including the tax cuts. And then you see how the overlap disappears. And there's almost none now. So I think the best for your strat plans, the strategic plan, the best thing to assume, if Obamacare fails, there'll be nothing for at least 20 years coming from the feds, nothing. And so it's really up to the states. The spell check didn't work here. It took 20 years after the Clintons debacle, which was Ira Magaziner's fault, in my view. It took 20 years till anyone had the guts to touch it, and that was Obama. If this one fails, then I think it'll probably at least 20 years before the feds ever will look at it again. So the burden is on states and communities. So that's what it'll be. I think health reform will be substantially driven by the states, and therefore you need very good commissioners of health who are visionaries, who can actually drive this, and governors with whom they can work, and so on, because the feds won't help you. And communities where that actually works. See, New York as a state has already been far more progressive. Compare New York and Texas or Louisiana. I mean, New York, many of these problems had already been solved long ago in New York. When you go down there, my God. Also communities. Now, if you have gray hair, you will remember the community of Rochester. And in Rochester, you had Eastman Kodak, there was Xerox was there, and then you had Blue Cross, a big gorilla, and then a couple of hospitals. And these people jointly sort of sat around tables and said, what does the community want from healthcare? What can the business community and their workers afford? Let's hash out some kind of deal. And the leader of it was a visionary physician, Ernie Sayward, who later went to Oregon. And that's what it was. And I remember in those days that some people called it, called it a cartel, but most of us thought it was just a cooperative, the way cooperatives work. And it's worked well. Rochester was cheaper than everywhere else and had very high quality care. And this became the model for other nations, states. But particularly, I forget the legislation's number, if I could look it up, but President Ford passed a health planning law in 1974 that had, and people with hair like my color will remember it was called Health Services Areas, and they were supposed to be Health Services Agency, HSA. Regional planning, so you had tertiary centers, less than tertiary centers. There would be some workforce planning, and they would hash out what they could afford to spend in the region. That was a law. But that law was brushed aside. President Reagan came in with what's called the pro-competitive strategy, because they said this planning is just all bureaucrats, they'll muck it up, and let's have raw competition. And we converted the healthcare system into an economic warfare field, which in many ways it has been. Even if you go to New York, these academic health centers, they're at war with each other, competing, unless they ultimately join forces. And the rest is history. So I think some communities can do this sort of thing. I would think Albany could do that. Rochester could, Buffalo probably could, Baltimore could, and they do. The new application, the waiver, it's stakeholders who work together. So I have a feeling that'll be the wave of the future. And so what you need is community leaders, an elite who actually do this. Never mind, you know, the average people cannot do this. They're busy. You shouldn't trouble with them. That requires community leadership. I'm an elitist that way. You know, you have to have leaders who do things and then tell the rest of the people that this is a reasonable deal, just accept it. And that's how it needs to be done. So that's basically what I say. The status quo was not acceptable. What the Affordable Care Act may work, but it's only a patch on the system. My hunch is the burden of this work reverts back to the states where it used to be and to local communities if they have the leaders who will get together and get this thing done. My wife is Chinese, and when I have a crisis, you know, something always goes wrong. She always says, think like a Chinese. We have a word, wei ji. It means crisis, but it means danger and opportunity. And she said, you know, in almost any danger or challenge, there is an opportunity for you, and maybe sometimes that's what it takes. I mean, when Rahm Emanuel said a good crisis shouldn't be wasted, that's really what this is about. And so that's how I would see what's happening with Obamacare and what's happening with U.S. healthcare, et cetera. Yeah, there's some challenges here, but there are tremendous opportunities to really sharpen up this system, make it more high quality, make it more cost effective, more transparent, more accountable. I tell my students, if I were you, I'd go get my life in healthcare somewhere. Physician, terrific. I think it's, last night I even told him, an extremely rewarding profession, because when you die, you can remember whom you helped. You can see their faces. When you're an economist and you die, you have two major questions. A, did I help anybody? And B, if so, what did they look like? You know, this is not so pleasant. Doctors actually know this. But there are many other fields in healthcare, bioengineering, running good websites, many ways you can have good living. This, by the way, is my wife. You may wonder, why does she wear this Russian uniform? She bought that for herself in Berlin in 1990 after the Berlin Wall fell, and there were Russian officers literally selling the uniforms off their back for German marks, because, you know, they had to go back to Russia. So she wore this. And the kids asked, why are you wearing this ridiculous Soviet uniform? And she says, you know, your dad is German-born, and nothing so scares the hell out of a German than a Russian uniform. and I have to tell you, it works.
So I want to thank Dr. Reinhardt for both an informative and absolutely entertaining talk tonight. And he's really proven once and for all that even economics doesn't have to be boring. So thank you very much. Thank you. If you could take a seat. Yeah, do you want to take?